Hello, everyone, and welcome to the All Sports Betting Podcast Cricket World Cup final preview. We're here at the end of the road, Kev. England against New Zealand at Lords, all set for the grand occasion. And how do you see it going? Who's going to win the World Cup?
I knew you were going to ask me that one. Can I answer the same as what I did for the two semi-finals? Team that bats first, albeit in the second semi-final, obviously the team that batted second won. I don't know, to be honest, Steve. I really think it's a closer final than the odds suggest. I've got to say that much first and foremost. Maybe this time, actually, the team chasing will win. Maybe this will be a good toss to lose, and you want to be bowling first under not cloud-leaden skies, but there's going to be a few clouds around, isn't there? But, any nervy batting, you could be out of this final before you're in it, can't you, if you're 40 for 4. So I'm just thinking back to 1999 on this ground, actually. Pakistan batted first, didn't they, against Australia, made a complete kibosh of it. Never really in the game. I think Australia chased it down when you're on 30 overs left, didn't they? And then if you think back to 4 years ago against this very New Zealand side, the exact same thing happened, didn't it? Mitchell Starc ripped out Brendan McCullum after 4 or 5 balls, and New Zealand never recovered, and they were never in the game either. Australia chased it down with about 20 overs to spare. So maybe this time that sort of statistic that we expected going into the tournament, the chasing sides to ring true, maybe that'll come good here.
Yeah, I was looking at some stats, and England lose more one-day internationals at this venue than at home than any other. Now, why is that, do you think? Is it a case of it doesn't suit England, or did the opposition raise it for Lords? It's not a particularly great venue, is it, for England, this one, compared to other grounds, anyway?
I think there's a few reasons for that, actually, Steve. I think the atmosphere is better at outgrounds or outer grounds. Certainly Edgbaston, isn't it? I mean, Edgbaston, the atmosphere is fantastic. I'm just thinking of where England generally have good records. The Ageas Bowl, you usually get good atmosphere down there. Bristol. Whereas at Lords is a bit la-di-da, isn't it? It's a bit Wimbledon, if you like. It's a bit the Wimbledon tennis, it's not Wimbledon football. It's a bit toffs, isn't it? I mean, we've both been to Lords, and we've both been to other cricket grounds, and nothing, you can certainly tell the difference. So I don't think the atmosphere is necessarily right behind England, and of course it remains to be seen how many Englishmen are actually going to be in the ground, because an awful lot of tickets went to Indian supporters who they've not needed them for a few days now, have they? So it'll be an interesting one. Certainly there's an element of opposition raising their game at Lords. There really is. Maybe conditions don't suit England either. Maybe that slope, it doesn't allow England to just hit through the line, does it? So, but there's definitely something in it, because, I mean, if you think back to the South Africa series before the Champions Trophy 2 years ago, England demolished South Africa in the first 2 games of that series. Everyone expected a 3-0 whitewash against South Africa side who were doing nothing. Then they went to Lords, and all of a sudden they were like 90 for 6 or something stupid like that. And ended up getting beaten really, really comfortably. Obviously, Australia have absolutely battered us in this tournament here, and you can see the difference when we played them at Edgbaston. So there's definitely something in it. And if you think back to Headingley, where England lost to Sri Lanka, that's another ground where England are terrible. They need to get that out of their minds going into this final, that is for sure.
Okay, well, on to some bets for the game then. And Chris Woke served you very well against Australia in the semi-final, and you're sticking with him on the performance line. And, it's hardly changed. It's just gone up by a couple of points, that's all. 38.5 now. And, he seems a bloke in good form, doesn't he?
He does. In after about 5 overs, wasn't it, in that semi-final, against a better batting lineup, or certainly better top order than what he's going to be facing here. I mean, New Zealand have got a couple of walking wickets at the top, haven't they? I really think they need to bring Colin Munro back into their side for this game. Henry Nicholls has offered nothing. I know Munro hasn't either, but at least Munro's got the threat of taking the game away from England, whereas Nicholls just static, and if he's a walking wicket, he's not really offering anything at all. But whoever's there, I'm not bothered, because Chris Wokes can mop up both of them. Lord should suit him, should get some early swing, comes back in the middle overs, bowls at the death. We've seen it all before, we've seen it throughout the tournament. Didn't actually take 2 wickets on this ground against Australia in in the group game. But if you think back to that game, England didn't really bowl particularly well for 25 overs of that game. But if anyone did bowl well at the start of the innings, it was Chris Wokes. He went past the edge on a number of occasions. Hopefully this time he catches that edge, and whoever's behind the stumps, be it the wicketkeeper or slips, do the necessary. But it's not just about his wicket-taking prowess, is it, Steve? We've seen on this ground that he can take really, really good catches. He's a run scorer as well. He scored 20 odd against Australia in the ODI here earlier in the tournament. He's got his career best test figures here when he scored that century against India a couple of years ago. He's also got his career best test figures here, which is no real surprise because, like I say, he can get the ball to swing here. So I just think all things being equal, like you mentioned, he's in good form. This line is really low. I mean, I mentioned that he's a 3D cricketer in the semi-final, didn't I? Anytime you get a 3D cricketer of a line of 40 or less, particularly one who bowls his 10 overs in the positions that Chris Wokes does, you've really got to be taking the overs each and every time.
Yeah, it's keeping with performances. Well, you're going with Kane Williamson, over 48.5 performance points here. The captain of New Zealand, you're expecting a good game from him.
Yeah, he delivered the goods on this very bet in that game last week, didn't he? And he was really good to us because he didn't just deliver the goods, but he delivered the goods on the number and then out of there. So he's protected his line. It's only gone up 2 points higher. We had this problem last week, didn't we? Last Wednesday when the two sides met in Durham. Do you take Kane Williamson's run line, which is 38.5 in this game, or do you take his performance, which in this case is 48.5? I mentioned last week if he gets a start, he's incredibly likely to go deep. Actually, that didn't happen, did it? Because Mark Wood's fingertips got in the way and he was run out of the non-striker's end. But that's the only time in this tournament he hasn't made 40 with the bat. He took 2 catches in that game. They didn't need to make up the performance, but I've got to think that there's not going to be no freakish run-outs here. Usually as a batsman, you're once bitten, twice shy with that kind of thing, aren't you? So he won't be leaving his crease quite so readily this time, and if he does, he'll have the bat in the right hand and he'll get it down and everything else. So I think he's going to go really well here. I mean, he's the class act. There's a genuine case to be made for him being the batsman of the tournament. He might not have the most runs in the tournament, but when you think of the pressure situations he's batted in throughout the tournament, I don't think anyone's delivered the goods on a regular basis like he has. You've just got to make up your mind here. Do you take the 38.5 runs or do you take the 48.5, knowing full well that he could take catches? He could even bowl a few overs and get a wicket. He did get a wicket here against Australia earlier in the tournament. I'm going to take the performance. If he scores between, just like last week, if he scores between 39 and 48, then so be it. But if he takes a catch, then you're automatically on the right line. So I'll go with the performance in the hope that he delivers the goods in the field. But even if he doesn't, statistics show he's more than capable of getting 49 runs.
On to England batting, and you're going to take Johnny Bairstow's run line over 36.5 runs. Just a word on Bairstow and also Jason Roy. Been pretty amazing ever since Roy's return. England have been rejuvenated, really. I mean, obviously Bairstow's been very important in this tournament for England, but it seems like with Roy there alongside him, he's a different man. I mean, these two have been crucial to England's success, haven't they? Not just in this tournament, but in the last year.
Jason Roy in particular, yeah, we've seen that in this tournament. I've said it for 2 years, Steve. If Jason Roy played in that semi-final against Pakistan 2 years ago in the Champions Trophy, England would have won that tournament. It was a ridiculous decision to drop him. We're seeing that now. He's a massive, massive, massive impact on this side, and it's so good that he wasn't suspended for this final. He could quite easily have been suspended for this final. Thankfully, common sense has prevailed. He got an absolute shocker of a decision, and hopefully Mr. Dharmasena doesn't repeat that in this final. It's a travesty alone that he's getting this final, but we'll go. That's for another day, another time. Roy's massive. Yeah, look at those games that Roy didn't play. I'm a Hampshire fan. I'm a massive James Vince fan. But England are a different side with Jason Roy in it, and Johnny Bairstow in particular is a different batsman with Jason Roy in it, and they complement each other very well. And I expect both of them to score well here, but Bairstow in particular.
Why is it the Bairstow run line that you're more interested in taking than the Roy one?
Because he scored 3 centuries in his last 3 innings against New Zealand. Obviously, one of those being last week in Durham. I think he's batting really, really well. If there is a calmness to the two, I think he's the one who's got more of it. I think Roy can still be a little bit het up, can't he? He can still overhit his shots, and you don't really want to be doing that against Bolton and Henry. So I'll just take the slightly more measured approach of Bairstow. If you put Jason Roy in the Brendan McCullum mould of 4 years ago, you don't want him swinging around a straight one early on in his innings. Bairstow's unlikely to do that. He gives himself a little bit more time, doesn't he, before he gets going. And his record against New Zealand, we mentioned it last Wednesday when we did the podcast for that game. It was back-to-back hundreds going into that game against New Zealand. It's now 300s in 3 innings against them. He's got a pretty decent enough record at Lords as well. So the slope doesn't tend to get him. And I think he's the more reliable of the two, really.
Yeah, I seem to remember off the top of my head he has definitely hit some runs at Lords in Test matches anyway. And I think he actually had a big one-day international score here. Might have been against Ireland off the top of my head. So yeah, he does like Lords. The slope can suit him. On to your final bet for the game, and it's a big price. Mitch Santner, man of the match, 33-1. That's at William Hill. I have to say he's been pretty good actually, Santner, in this tournament. Fairly economical. But can he do enough in this final to get that man of the match? I mean, to be fair, 33-1, you pay to find out, don't you? But can he get enough wickets? Does he need that many wickets?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's a speculative thing. He didn't really take many wickets against India, did he? But he played an important part in the match. I think his first 6 overs went for 6 runs, didn't they? 7 runs. Okay, admittedly, Dhoni was in and around some of that. But England will try and take him on, won't they? That's England's method against spin. But he's not the easiest one to get hold of, is he? He's shown that a few times. He's very Daniel Vettori-like, this bloke. Very hard to get hold of. If England do come down to him and make a complete pig's ear of it, you could see him getting a couple of 3 wickets. I fancy this wicket's going to be a little bit drier than maybe the groundsman would hope, Steve. It has been roasting down in the south of England for the last week. Actually, it's a little bit cooler this evening, thankfully. We're recording this podcast on the eve of the game. But yeah, I think it'll be a dryish wicket. I'm not going to say he's going to get spin because he doesn't tend to get spin anyway, does he? But he's got that mixture of pace, that good line, that good length. He's that nagging bowler that England know they're going to have to get after, but he isn't necessarily the easiest to do. And also on the flip side of that, he's a fantastic fielder. He's influenced games in the field already in this tournament. Really good batsman. It could just be that a cameo in the field, a cameo with the bat, and a solid bowling spell is the kind of thing that wins a tight final. And I do expect this to be a tight final. I expect it to be a relatively low-scoring final overall. Don't think we're going to see 300 against 300, for example. So it might just be that at the key moments, Santner can do something to win the game for his side. I mean, obviously he's a big price because New Zealand aren't expected to win the game. But if they do win the game, I've just got this sneaking feeling there's an unsung hero for them. And why not him? He's competent with all 3 disciplines, and you just never know in finals.
Yeah, before we end the podcast, let's just talk about the mentality of both sides, because there's question marks about both. I mean, England are renowned, I'm not calling them bottlers or chokers, but things don't always go so well for English sporting teams in general, do they, in big matches? It was a bit, in a way, a surprise that the semi-final against Australia went as well as it did for them. But then you got New Zealand, they lost the last World Cup final. They themselves have... You've always been nearly men, haven't they? In apart from obviously rugby, but one of these teams have got to win the World Cup, haven't they? So who's the toughest squad mentally? Do you think to deal with that?
Just by virtue of the fact that New Zealand have got 5 or 6 players in their side that played in that game 4 years ago, I would probably favour New Zealand. Sometimes in sport you have to lose before you can win, and New Zealand have done that, haven't they? By losing, you get that bit between your teeth. You get that horrible feeling of losing that you don't want to repeat, you don't want to feel ever again. And the likes of Trent Bolt, Kane Williamson, Ross Taylor in particular, because it's his last World Cup, Martin Guptill, they'll have felt that nasty feeling of losing, particularly losing to gloating Australians. Nothing worse than that, is there? As Englishmen, we know that full well. So I would say they're going to have their bit between the teeth here in New Zealand. My fear for England is that the openers don't get going. For all of Johnny Bairstow's record against New Zealand, and everything suggests that he'll score well, if he doesn't score well, do England recover, or do they keep on going for their shots and get themselves into more and more and more and more strife? It's an interesting final mentally, this one, Steve. The only good thing from an English point of view is we can't lose it on penalties. But there's plenty of other ways to lose it. There are match winners in both sides, and whichever match winner turns up on the day, his side will win the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, for England, the two openers are massive, aren't they? They could both win the game for England, and I'm not saying they'll lose the game, but it's a much bigger ask, isn't it, if they don't? So an awful lot.
I mean, if New Zealand have both Bairstow and Roy in the back in the hut before England have got 50, they'll think they're massively ahead of the game. Whereas the other way round, if England have Guptill and Munro / Nichols in the hutch before 50, New Zealand are just in the position they've been throughout the tournament. So both the opening stands, particularly England's, it's massive. That opening spell from Trent Bolt, that's where this final could be won and lost. If Roy and Bairstow get away from New Zealand, as we saw at Durham last week, there may not be a pegging them back. If Australia can't peg them back, you've got to think New Zealand are going to struggle too.
Well, the weather forecast looks good for the day, so it should be a completed game, no problems at all. A bit cloudy, but here we go in the World Cup final then. Let's hope from an English point of view that they get the job done. But it's going to be a close one, and may the best team win.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I should just add to put another little point on that last question you asked me about pressure and who can handle it. There's even more pressure on England in this final now that the tournament's been made free to air. There hasn't been free to air cricket in England since 2005 when England won the Ashes. That ramps up a little bit more pressure. Everyone can watch this final now, whereas it was only a select few that could have watched it beforehand, and that might weigh England down a little bit more. But hopefully we get a good England performance. Hopefully we get a good New Zealand performance. Hopefully we get a fantastic final tour. It's been a brilliant competition, and we go out in style now that we've not got no betting interest with an England win.
All right. Well, thanks very much for your thoughts on this match and for the whole tournament, actually, Kev. So look out for more from All Sports Betting Podcasts very soon. We will announce what we'll be doing next. But from myself, that's the end of these Cricket World Cup podcast. It was a pleasure joining you, Kev.
Been a great 6 weeks, Steve. Here's hoping we finish it in style, mate. All the best.